In just 3 seasons, Carson Wentz went from an MVP favorite to benched. He was called selfish and egotistical by his teammates, but the quarterback's historic fall is more complex than you think. To understand how Wentz destroyed his own career, we're gonna have to go back to his senior year of high school, which marked the first time he got to be a starting QB. He put up decent numbers that season, but was still completely unranked and a 0-star recruit. A few offers from FCS schools trickled in that year, and Wentz opted to commit to North Dakota State University. His first 3 seasons on campus, Carson was a backup. But then, entering his junior year, well, technically his senior year because he redshirted as a true freshman, he was named the school's starting QB. As soon as he stepped on the field, Wentz shattered records. In just his first season as a starter, he broke the school's single-season passing record with 3,100 yards and scored 32 total touchdowns. The team went 15-1 that year and made it all the way to the national championship game. In that one, Carson scored the game-winning touchdown with just 37 seconds left. Heading into his 5th and final collegiate season, it seemed like Wentz would cement himself as the best quarterback in NDSU history. And throughout September, things were going that way. In just the first 5 games of the season, he had over 1,200 yards and 14 touchdowns. Every NFL team had gone to North Dakota to scout him during this stretch. But then, after an early October loss, Wentz went to bed with pain in his wrist. When he woke up the next morning, it was completely swollen. An X-ray soon revealed the QB had broken the wrist on his throwing hand. It was looking like Carson's college career was over. The only chance he had to play again was if the team went undefeated and made it to the playoffs. Luckily, the Bisons made the postseason and won their first 3 playoff games with Easton Stick at QB. Then, the day before the national championship game, it was announced Carson Wentz was cleared to play. In his final college game, he scored 3 touchdowns and led the Bisons to yet another national championship victory. Just 36 hours after the win, Wentz was in Los Angeles training for the NFL Combine. At this point, he was projected to be a mid to late first-round pick. But after his outstanding performance at the Combine, his draft stock soared. Scouts loved Wentz's combination of size and athleticism. Despite being 6'5", he ran a 4.77 40-yard dash, which was one of the fastest times for his position. But teams weren't just drooling over his big arm and physical attributes. They also loved how smart he was. Wentz scored a 40 on the Wonderlic Cognitive Ability Test, while the average score was just a 20. Following the Combine, Carson was drawing comparisons to Andrew Luck. Many felt he had the potential to be just like him. This projection eerily turned out to be right, but not in the way people expected. You'll see why in a few minutes. As the draft crept closer, the hype surrounding Wentz continued to grow. John Gruden said he was one of the most pro-ready quarterbacks he's seen in a while, and one specific NFL team was willing to give up a ton to draft him. Originally, the Browns held the 2nd overall pick in the draft, but the Eagles decided to send their 8th overall pick, 3rd rounder, 4th rounder, 2017 first round pick, and future 2nd rounder to Cleveland for the 2nd overall spot. When draft day arrived, quarterback Jared Goff was selected 1st overall by the Rams, so with the 2nd overall pick, the Eagles drafted their guy, Carson Wentz. Philly's plan was to let the rookie sit and learn for a year behind starter Sam Bradford. However, during training camp, Wentz played better than expected and actually looked better than Bradford. In the team's first preseason game, Carson got hit and fractured his rib, so now it seemed like Bradford was a lock to be the starting QB. But then another injury happened, on a different team though. Viking starter Teddy Bridgewater went down with a season-ending ACL injury, which meant Minnesota was now scrambling to find a new starting quarterback just a week before the start of the regular season. So just days before the first game of the year, the Eagles traded Bradford to the Vikings for a 1st and 4th round pick. That's how you know Minnesota was super desperate. They gave up a 1st and 4th round pick for Sam Bradford. After the trade, the Eagles announced Wentz would be the starting QB once healthy, despite missing the majority of the preseason due to his rib injury. Carson ended up being cleared to play in week 1, and in his first NFL game, he was set to face off with the Cleveland Browns. In that first game, Wentz impressed everyone, except for Browns fans who were probably just upset they had the chance to draft him and didn't. In the win, he passed for 200 278 yards, 2 touchdowns, and won the Rookie of the Week award. But it was in the third game of the season that Carson truly blew everyone away. In that matchup with the Steelers, Wentz went off, completing 74% of his passes for 301 yards, 2 touchdowns, and no interceptions. The Eagles won in blowout fashion, 34-3. Heading into week 4, the Eagles were undefeated, and Wentz was already looking like one of the better quarterbacks in the league. But then, things took a turn. Philly went on to win just 2 of their next 11 games. They ended the season with a 7-9 record, but this falloff wasn't Carson's fault. Yes, he wasn't as dominant after the first 3 games of the year, but for a rookie, he definitely didn't play bad. He finished his first year in the league by completing 62% of his passes for 3,700 yards, 18 total touchdowns, and 14 interceptions. Wentz also performed way better than Jared Goff, the quarterback that went 1 pick before him. The Eagles got to work that offseason, acquiring players that would help out their young QB. Philly signed wide receivers Torrey Smith and Alshon Jeffrey, as well as running back LeGarrette Blount. Also, they picked up backup quarterback Nick Foles. I mean, I don't even know why I'm mentioning him. Backup quarterbacks never make an impact, right? After showing flashes as a rookie, fans expected Wentz's play to take a big leap forward in 2017. However, no one could have imagined what the quarterback was about to do. In each of the team's first 2 games, Wentz threw for over 300 yards and 2 touchdowns. Entering week 3, the Eagles had a 1-1 record. With just over 12 minutes remaining in a game versus the Giants, they were up 14-0. But then, New York scored 3 unanswered touchdowns, and Philly found themselves down 7 with around 6 minutes left to play. Would Carson be able to step up and get his team back on track? Well, when he got the ball, he led the Eagles on a touchdown drive, so the game was now tied. But then, when the Giants got the ball back, they hit a field goal to take the lead with 3 minutes remaining. Carson was locked in though, and when he got the ball in his hands again, he led the Eagles on a drive that set up the game-tying field goal with just under a minute to go. New York went cold their next possession and gave the ball back to Philly with 13 seconds left. It seemed like this game was headed to overtime. I mean, the Eagles were at their own 38 and had 1 timeout. Certainly, they wouldn't score, right? At least that's what my Giants fan self was saying. Well, Carson wasn't thinking that. He threw the ball into triple coverage, and somehow Alshon Jeffrey came down with it at the Giants 44. The NFL season is right around the corner, and I've been looking to find the best deal on Giants tickets, which is why I'm excited to share that SeatGeek is the sponsor of today's video. Watching football in person, it just hits different. When you're screaming, yelling, making as much noise as you possibly can while the opposing team's on offense, you really feel like you have some impact on the game. With over 28 million downloads, SeatGeek is the #1 rated ticketing app. They put all the tickets across the web in one place to make sure you're getting a good deal. Each ticket is rated on a scale from 1 to 10. The green dots mean great deal. The red dots mean bad, so look for those green dots. And you know, I came through for you guys, so make sure to use the code SheGotSports10 for 10% off your next order, no matter how many times you've used the app before. So take out your phone, open the SeatGeek app, and add code SheGotSports10 to your account. Make sure you do it now because this offer is only available for a limited time. With 1 second left, the Eagles decided to send out their rookie kicker, Jake Elliott, to attempt a 61-yard game-winning field goal. Well, guess what? He nailed it, and I'm about to show you something I might regret. Something from the vault. Clips of young me's heartbroken post-game reaction.
I think it's gonna go to overtime so close. Your heart just gets ripped out of your chest is the only way I can describe it. Just ripped out of your chest. Today was the worst. 61 yards? I mean, props to the guy. Props to the rookie kicking a 61-yard field goal. I thought, no way. Props to Carson Wentz. I mean, he's great. Props to him. He is a really, really good quarterback.
Yeah, you know, that's just super embarrassing for me. This win changed everything for the Eagles, though. It marked the start of a 9-game win streak. Carson quickly became unstoppable. In week 5, he completed 70% of his passes for 304 yards and 4 touchdowns. After that win, the media started to mention him as an MVP candidate. During that 9-game win streak, Wentz had over 2,000 yards, 24 touchdowns, and just 3 interceptions. He was playing insanely efficient football while scoring a ton. The Eagles averaged over 33 points per game during that stretch. They were one of the best, if not the best offense in the league that season. Philly's Week 14 game was set to be won with tons of dramatic storylines. At this point, Carson was the clear favorite to win MVP, but on the team they were about to face was Todd Gurley, who some felt should win the award instead. Wentz went out in that matchup and absolutely shredded a great Rams defense. In just 3 quarters, he had nearly 300 yards and 4 touchdowns. But then, the play happened that changed Carson Wentz's life. As he dove into the end zone for a touchdown, his leg got sandwiched between 2 defenders. The play got called back due to holding, so despite getting up with a limp, Carson stayed in the game and threw a touchdown 3 plays later. The Eagles fans in the Coliseum were serenading him with MVP chants, but as soon as he walked off the field, he went into the blue medical tent and was then quickly sent back to the locker room. A few minutes later, he was ruled out with a knee injury, and in that moment, without the Eagles saying it, we all knew what that injury was: a torn ACL. His season was over. The Eagles were the favorite to win the Super Bowl, but now they didn't have their starting QB, so many felt their season was over. Despite being the 1 seed in the NFC, Philly was a 2.5-point underdog in their first playoff game versus the last seed Falcons. This was a low-scoring matchup, with Atlanta leading 10-9 at halftime. However, as the game went on, Wentz's replacement, Nick Foles, started to get into a rhythm and led the Eagles on multiple drives that ended in a field goal. After Philly's defense had played so well all game, they started to slip up late in the fourth quarter. With just over a minute left, Atlanta down 5 had the ball inside the Eagles' 10. They got down to the 2-yard line, and then it was 4th and goal. The Falcons season came down to this play, but Philly's defense stood tall and got the goal line stop to secure the win. The Eagles were now headed to the NFC Championship game. Yet again, they were 3-point underdogs, but this time they took it personal and obliterated the Vikings 38-7. Foles was on a tear in this game. He completed 78% of his passes for 352 yards, 3 touchdowns, and no turnovers. So somehow the team that everyone wrote off was headed to the Super Bowl, and the guy that did a ton to get them there was seemingly forgotten about. This was Nick Foles' team now. No one felt the need to talk about Carson Wentz, and he didn't like that. Before the Super Bowl, Carson shared his displeasure with the Eagles' success to a group of other injured players. Veteran Darren Sproles then confronted the QB for being selfish, and the two had to be separated. This injury seemed to be the first real adversity Wentz faced in his career. Yes, he broke his wrist in college, but he was able to dramatically return in the final game of the season. That wasn't going to be happening this time around, and it seemed like he didn't know how to handle not being the star. He wasn't mentally tough enough. Spoiler alert, as this video goes on, there's going to be more and more situations popping up like this for Wentz. In the big game, Philly was set to face off with Tom Brady, the player who actually ended up winning MVP that year, and the Patriots. As I'm sure you could have guessed, the Eagles were underdogs yet again, this time by 4 whole points. But then, Nick Foles stepped on the field and had the greatest game of his career. He completed 65% of his passes for 373 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, and oh yeah, caught one of the most famous touchdowns in NFL history. After leading the Eagles to their first Super Bowl victory ever, Foles was named the game's MVP. I'm sure Carson couldn't have been happier for him. After the Super Bowl win, the media started asking if Foles should be the Eagles starting quarterback even once Wentz was healthy. And to make things even more awesome for Carson, a statue of Foles was unveiled outside of the stadium just before the start of the season. Nick was the Eagles starter for the first 2 games of 2018. But that was because Wentz wasn't fully recovered yet. When he was cleared to play in Week 3, Foles returned to the bench. Wentz played really well in his first 5 games back. He averaged 300 yards per game and threw 10 touchdowns to just 1 interception during that stretch. However, once November hit, his play started to decline. An anonymous player then went to the media and said the QB was throwing the ball to tight end Zach Ertz too much, which messed up the rhythm of the rest of the offense. In December, news broke that Carson had a fracture in his back and would be out for the rest of the season. To make matters even worse, the team had done imaging on his back a few weeks earlier but didn't see the fracture in his back then. So Nick Foles was back under center, but this time around, the Eagles were far from a number 1 seed. When he took over as the starter in week 15, the team was 6-7 and fighting for a playoff spot. Foles then put the team on his back, leading them on a 3-game win streak, which locked up the last playoff spot in the NFC. In those 3 weeks, he completed 76% of his passes while averaging 320 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception per game. His teammates then built him a shrine. Yes, a shrine in their locker room. I mean, that just makes me think they really didn't like Carson Wentz. In the wildcard round versus the 3-seed Bears, the Eagles were big underdogs. Foles didn't have a great game in this one, but thanks to the double doink, Philly won and was headed to New Orleans to take on the 1-seed Saints. Foles didn't perform well yet again in the divisional round, and the Eagles lost a close one to end their season. With Foles' play declining, it seemed like Wentz was primed to win back the locker room the upcoming season. However, just days after the Eagles' 2018 season ended, multiple players went to the media anonymously and called him, quote, selfish, uncompromising, and egotistical. They also said he played favorites, didn't like to be questioned, and lacked accountability. I think the most telling quote has to be what this anonymous player told the Philly Voice. Quote, he's had his ass kissed his whole life, and sometimes acts like he's won 10 Super Bowls when he hasn't played in, let alone won a playoff game yet. Everyone around him wants good things for him. He did more thinking on the field than he did playing in 2018. You don't have to be a brain surgeon or a football expert to see how differently this team plays and reacts with one guy as opposed to the other. Oof. I mean, that anonymous player basically admitted that the team liked playing with Foles more than Wentz. It was also reported that Carson would complicate the offense. Wentz didn't always run the plays his coaches called in, and instead would pick his own. This sometimes resulted in turnovers and missed easy completions. Plus, it was said that during training camp in 2018, he refused to run some of the team's plays since they were, quote, Foles stuff. Despite these reports surfacing, the Eagles decided to stick with Wentz. After Foles left in free agency to sign with the Jaguars, Philly gave Carson a new 4-year, $128 million extension. Heading into the 2019 season, the big question was, could Carson return to his pre-injury self? And after the first game of the season, the answer to that question seemed to be yes. In a win versus Washington, Wentz completed 71% of his passes for 313 yards and 3 touchdowns. But then, just 1 week later, he looked like a totally different QB, completing just 58% of his passes for 231 yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 interceptions. The gunslinger style of play used to work well before his injury, but not so much after it. The thing is, Carson refused to see this. He refused to adjust and just kept chucking the ball down the field, which often resulted in an interception. His teammates were getting annoyed, and in October, an anonymous player went to the media yet again and basically said Carson needs to stop playing hero ball, saying, quote, Peyton Manning even knew when to check it down. Entering week 14, Philly was 5-7. But then they won the final 4 games of the season and were crowned the NFC East champs. During that stretch, Wentz played some of his best post-injury football. He averaged 300 yards per game and threw 7 touchdowns to 0 interceptions. So now the time had finally come for Carson Wentz to make his first playoff start. But then, just 9 snaps in, the thing that truly ruined Carson Wentz's career happened. He got hit from behind by Jadeveon Clowney and was quickly ruled out with a concussion. The concussion was super serious. It gave Carson temporary memory loss. 2019 actually ended up being statistically one of the best years of Wentz's career. He became the first player in Eagles history to pass for over 4,000 yards and had 27 touchdowns to just 7 interceptions. But following that season, the Eagles did something unexpected. They selected quarterback Jalen Hurts in the 2nd round of the 2020 draft. Wentz reportedly responded, quote, very negatively to this. Carson was named the team's starter entering the regular season, but things didn't go as planned. Throughout the first 3 weeks, Carson completed an average of 57% of his passes for 736 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. Wentz just couldn't stop playing hero ball. The Eagles' wide receiver group was pretty weak in 2020, and it was clear Wentz didn't trust them. So Carson tried to win games all by himself, which never worked. Instead, it often resulted in sacks or turnovers. He refused to just simply throw the ball away. Wentz also held onto the ball for way too long. He was indecisive and waited for receivers to get open instead of throwing them open. Carson never had the greatest mechanics, but that defect was often covered up by his athleticism. But after the ACL tear, he wasn't as quick, and all of a sudden, his poor mechanics were on full display. He was trying to play like Patrick Mahomes without actually having the tools Mahomes has. Wentz's toxic relationship with head coach Doug Peterson also just got worse during this time. According to Adam Schefter, the QB and coach didn't talk for 8 straight weeks during the season. But then, in week 13, things reached a boiling point. In the middle of a game versus the Packers, Peterson benched Wentz in favor of Hurts. He played well and was named the starter for the rest of the season. So just like that, the QB who was the favorite to win MVP just 3 seasons prior was no longer a starter. Despite only playing 12 games that year, Wentz had the most interceptions, total turnovers, and sacks taken in the league. After that season, the Eagles decided to move forward with Jalen Hurts as their QB and traded Wentz to the Colts for a 3rd and conditional 2nd-round pick. Some believed this fresh start could revive Wentz's career. In Indianapolis, he would be reunited with Frank Reich, his old offensive coordinator from his MVP-esque season. Unfortunately, even on a new team, Carson couldn't catch a break. During training camp, he injured his foot and had to undergo surgery on it. He was cleared to play in the team's Week 1 game, but the regular season didn't start well at all. After week 3, the team was winless. But then, Carson started playing some cleaner football, and throughout the next 4 games, threw for over 1,000 yards with 8 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. Following a Week 16 win, the Colts were 9-6. All they had to do was win one of their final 2 games, and they would lock up a playoff spot. In Week 17, Carson didn't play well at all, and the team lost to the Raiders. It was okay though, because the team still had one final game to clinch their playoff spot, and luckily for them, it was against the worst team in the league, the Jacksonville Jaguars. There was no way they would lose to a team with just 2 wins, right? Well, Wentz played terrible, the entire team played terrible, and they lost by multiple scores. 3 months later, in March, the Colts sent Carson to the Commanders for multiple mid-round picks. Indianapolis didn't just trade the QB because of what happened in Jacksonville. It was much deeper than that. Throughout the season, the team had become frustrated with his lack of leadership, resistance to hard coaching, and reckless style of play. So yeah, basically he acted the same way in Indianapolis as he did in Philly. The Colts owner said the Carson Wentz era was a mistake he couldn't wait to fix, and that the inconsistency at quarterback during that season led to a massive problem. Entering the 2022 season, Wentz was named the Commanders' Week 1 starter. He threw 4 touchdowns in the team's first game of the year versus the Jaguars. Just about 9 months late with that performance though, Carson. 9 months late. It would have been great 9 months earlier. Washington went on to lose their next 4 games, and in week 6, Wentz fractured his finger and was placed on the IR. Of course, the backup that stepped in to play for Wentz actually played well, because, that's just what happens. And once Carson was cleared to play in December, he was left on the bench, as the team opted to keep Taylor Heinicke as their starter. Heinicke was eventually benched in the middle of a Week 16 game, and Carson was yet again named the team's QB1. At this point, the Commanders still had a chance to make the playoffs. All they had to do was win their final 2 games. In his first game back as a starter, with the playoffs on the line, Wentz was putrid, completing just 57% of his passes for 153 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions in a loss versus the Browns. Following that season, the Commanders released Carson. No team was interested in signing him though, and when the 2023 regular season started, he wasn't on a team. Eventually, in November, the Rams signed him to backup Stafford, and heading into the 2024 season, he's one of the Chiefs' backup quarterbacks. At the end of the day, Wentz ruined his own career. Yes, he was dealt a tough hand with the injuries, but he was stubborn and refused to change the way he played, even though it would have benefited the team. I think Wentz's story shows just how important mental strength is in this league. He was a fantastic prospect. He had everything you look for in a quarterback's physical traits and tools. But when adversity struck, he didn't know how to handle it because he never had to before. What I find super interesting is that teams loved Carson in their pre-draft interviews. The Eagles even had a renowned sports psychologist meet with him before the draft, and he gave the team an extremely positive report on the QB. So what changed? According to his teammates, the change happened after the ACL injury, which again just goes to show how important experience overcoming adversity is. Robert Griffin III is another player that looked like one of the best quarterbacks in the league early in his career, but then lost it all. If you want to learn what really caused his downfall, and no, it's not the injuries, check out this video over here. It low-key has some weird parallels to Wentz's story too.